We, the servants also of the highest, reverently here present in his holy fear, do earnestly beseech, humbly request, strongly invocate, call forth, and powerfully move you to visible appearance in, by, and through these excellent, sacred, and divine names of your God.
Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today we are esoterically elated to welcome back to the show author, esoteric researcher, and magician, David Rankine. In Solomonic magic, you've probably heard of the license to depart. But have you ever heard about the license to remain? Also, do you need permission to do a conjuration? And what exactly are the planetary intelligences that we read about in Agrippa and other sources from hundreds of years ago? What happens if you use slightly incorrect sigils or ritual implements during a conjuration? And what are the key step-by-step tips that can actually make a conjuration successful? Well, the great David Rankine is the perfect person to ask. He's an author, esoteric researcher, and magician who lives in Spain with his partner, artist and tattooist Rosa Laguna, and their daughter. And he's been making major contributions to the modern occult revival since the 1980s through lectures, workshops, presentations, articles, and books. David's esoteric expertise covers a wide range of topics, including the Western esoteric traditions, especially the Kabbalah, the grimoire tradition, Greco-Egyptian magic and ceremonial magic, as well as British folklore and European mythology. David's esoteric knowledge and scholarship can be seen in the more than 32 books he has authored, his essays in various anthologies, and hundreds of articles for magazines, journals, international part works, and websites. David is no stranger to the Glitch Bottle podcast. He joined us last year sharing about his invaluable massive 2-volume tome of the Grimoire Encyclopedia, which is a vital resource for every Solomonic conjurer. And today, David is stopping by to share about his upcoming tome from Hadean Press entitled Clavis Intelligentiarum, a complete practical manual of conjuration of the planetary intelligences. Listeners, this book is vital because here we have collected all in one place not only a detailed exposition of the planetary intelligences and corrections to Agrippa's sigils, but also we have a treasure trove of key tips and guidance from David's direct experience that has made conjuration successful for him over his many years of practice. It is a step-by-step manual for conjuration, and David goes deep in this episode. I know you're going to love it. We discuss all of this, as well as David answers your Glitch Bottle Patreon listener questions, and we have a special after show for you over on patreon.com/glitchbottle. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, let's welcome back to the show, David Rankine. David Rankine, thank you so much for taking the time and stopping back on the Glitch Bottle podcast today.
Thanks so much for having me again, Alexander. I'm delighted to be here.
I don't know when you sleep, but your Mozart-like ability to produce incredible amounts of research and scholarship and practicality, you have done it again from Hadean Press. Your latest upcoming tome is the Clavis Intelligentiarum, a complete practical manual of conjuration of the planetary intelligences. Before we get into the specifics, David, can you share with the listeners what inspired you to write this very, very in-depth and very practical book?
Well, last year I was contacted by an Italian group, the Sulphur Society, and they asked myself and Stephen Skinner if we would each do a presentation for them. They were doing a series of workshops for a group of people, and they wanted to end with a conjuration. And due to timing, Stephen ended up going before me. So we discussed what we thought would be a good starter conjuration, which was the intelligences. Stephen went through all the theory with them, and then I went through a sequence of practice. And while I was putting together the material for that, Jason Miller, I was reminded of words in his blog. He wrote a very nice review of the Grimoire Encyclopedia. And in there, he made a comment about the chapter I wrote on practice, saying, this is the voice of Rankine the Conjurer, a voice, frankly, we don't hear enough of. And those words just triggered something in my brain. And I thought, for years, I've been telling people the intelligences, I think, are one of the best ways to start doing conjuration. But the only source of conjurations is in Sloan 3821, which I published with Hayden a few years ago. And that is just the conjurations. And I realized that, in a sense, I was offering people empty advice. Because although I do think it's a great way to start, if someone's starting, just having those conjurations without knowing everything that goes around it, practice all the preparation things, means that it's a good suggestion, but it's also kind of useless. So I thought, I need to write a book about these conjurations, but giving everything, so that someone who's never done a conjuration in their life can go through this book and they will know every step they need to take and do, and the preparation, and why they do it. So it literally covers the whole process, every single step. Like I say, the preparation, purifications, the consecrations, making lamans, your tools, the works. I thought, I don't think anyone's ever done that before, where someone has written a book that gives absolutely everything, where you don't need to go and look anywhere else, where it's not hinting at this or suggesting stuff. It's just laid out in black and white. This is all the stuff. This is what you do. This is why you do it. So that's where the book came from. And then it just caught fire in my head. I was in the middle of writing another book, but I just paused on that because I just had to then write this book. That's happened with the Grimoire Encyclopedia. It just kind of obsessed me, and I just had to get the book written. And as with the Grimoire Encyclopedia, some would wake up in the night because my unconscious had realizations about things that needed to go in the book or needed to be changed. And it just took over.
I think this is a great place to start, just to have kind of a level set. And to that point, we have a listener question for you from Glitch Bottle patron McKinley Valentine. And McKinley is saying and asking, I've never been able to understand the difference between the planetary archangels, the intelligences, and the Olympic spirits. Are they different names for the same thing? If not, when would you call on one versus another? And what has drawn you, David, personally to study the intelligences so deeply rather than the others? Thank you, McKinley says.
Okay, so there's a few separate bits in there that need unpacking. As I like to do a lot, I'll sort of start with an analogy. In this analogy, we'll say we've got a garage where cars go to be fixed. The person who owns the garage and runs it is the planetary archangel. The mechanic who fixes things is planetary intelligence. Now, let's say that person owns another garage, and in that garage, the engineer, mechanic who fixes things is the Olympic spirit. What the Olympic spirits and intelligences do, there's a lot of crossover. The intelligences are sort of like directly below, if you like, the archangels in the hierarchy. So I like the intelligences because they're very accessible. In the descriptions of them, we see they're described being very affable, benevolent, courteous, and they are a lot easier to contact than archangels. Archangels, people talk about talking to them all the time, but I don't think most of the time people are talking to them. It takes a lot of work to make a good contact with an archangel, your purification stuff. You're looking at least a good week of really serious preparation to do that. Some years back, when I should have known better, for example, I got a bit lazy and only did 3-day purification and fast and stuff for a conjuration of Michael. He didn't turn up. He sent a minion who turned up, and on behalf of Michael, told me off for being lazy and not putting in the work, and not to expect to get the contact if I was not going to give the proper respect and put the work in that was required. Kind of an aside there about archangels. They're higher up the tree, as it were, so they are harder to contact for conjuration, but their energetic presence can be more easily accessed as the level above the intelligences or working with the intelligences. Their energy can be brought in, but their presence is not brought in. So, for example, with your Laman of the intelligence that you wear, the reverse side of it has the seal of the planetary archangel of the planet that intelligence is of, and that's facing towards your heart. And the seal of the intelligence is facing outward. So it's identifying you to the intelligence, and it's like a mark of respect and identification that you wish to have that communication with the intelligence. The Olympics are kind of and not of, in the sense that there are later texts which kind of put them into that hierarchy in a similar kind of place to the intelligences, but they also stand alone. And the Olympics have this very interesting quality which you don't tend to see with other spirits, in that they're said to be made up of a balance of all four elements. Whereas most spirits are usually airy, sometimes fiery. The Olympics are said to be made of a combination of air, fire, and water. So they have a somewhat different nature. And again, I think they are very accessible. I've done quite a lot of work with the Olympics and conjuring them up for covens, for example. I used to run back in the day, decades ago, so that people got an experience of conjuration, and the Olympics were ideal for that, so that people got that experience of that sort of spirit contact. So the intelligences and the Olympics, both easily accessible, and it's kind of just like a matter of personal choice. It's like apples and oranges. In a way, the intelligences, because they are more naturally part of that flow of that hierarchy, and also have the planetary spirits, aka planetary demons, below them, if you wish to sort of use them, the intelligence as a lens for the energy of the planetary spirit, then you could say that there are slightly more benefits of working with the intelligences than the Olympic spirits, but both good to work with. I hope that answers the question.
One of the things that you and I were discussing before the podcast, and one of the things that you detail in your tome, is that when it comes to the planetary intelligences, one of the first points that you make is that in the very famous 3 books of occult philosophy, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa doesn't actually give us anything much apart from the names of the intelligences themselves. So can you share about your scholarship, and specifically Sloan 3821, that manuscript, and why Sloan 3821 is such a vital manuscript that describes the offices and gives the conjurations of these intelligences?
Well, yeah, exactly. As you say, it's the one place where we have conjurations of the intelligences. You don't find them anywhere else. And the offices are mentioned in some other places. The Boxgrove manual has some bits of intelligence, but it tends to be repeating the same things. 3821 has this material, and it's also kind of part of a really interesting sequence. And you've got other ones like 3824, 3825, where you've got the intelligences there, you have the Lemegeton, you have Enochian stuff, and it's really interesting because they all have the same style of conjuration for all these different types of spirits, and it's almost like you've got like a template, and it's just there's different names and qualities being slotted in. So it's not actually just a standalone manuscript, because it seems to be part of a sequence of manuscripts where people were working with a whole different range of spiritual beings, which makes it, I think, even more interesting. That somebody who was doing this stuff was like, okay, let's work these intelligences as well and see what we get with that. To me, it feels like it was somebody who was doing other work decided to apply the same methodology to working with intelligences and came up with those conjurations. And then as a result of that, gives the discussion of the qualities and associated things for the intelligences based on their experience of those intelligences.
When it comes to the conjurations chapter itself, you are challenging more traditional approaches while staying true to the grimoiric Solomonic tradition. Specifically, So one of the things that I just love here is you are modernizing the language a little bit of the conjurations, and you're using more modern things that are relevant to today where appropriate. So can you share with us, David, when it comes to the conjurations, what are some of these changes and why do you think these changes are necessary?
If you look at the old conjurations, they're a product of their time. So when you have didst and mayest and words like that, it's easy to stumble over. I think that way of talking is not something that's been done for centuries. And to me, for a tradition to remain alive and evolving, it moves with the times. And I felt it was appropriate to update the English and the grammar of the conjurations so that it has that flow to it. I mean, I did keep the thou, thy, thine, because that's usually in reference to God or spiritual beings. And I feel that has a nice gravitas to it, which I felt should remain in the conjurations. But for the other bits, I just felt if you're doing a long conjuration, the last thing you want is to be stumbling over your words. Even with rehearsing and practicing beforehand, sometimes when you're looking at it, it's like, oh, so to me, this makes perfect sense. A while back, a few years back, somebody said, it's after the Planetary Intelligences came out, could I do this with the English more updated? And I was like, sure, let me get back to you. And I updated it, sent it to them, and they said, oh, thank you so much. I just found that so much easier. And then a few other people also asked, and I sent them the same thing, and they were like, this is great. We just find it so much easier to stay in the moment and in the flow of things because you're not having to worry about archaic terms. That's partially, again, the result of other people's suggestions. It's not just me going, oh yeah, I'm this brilliant person who thinks everything must be updated. I do think things must be updated, but I also acknowledge that sometimes other people say, can you do this? And then that will give me an idea and inspiration to go and then do something. So that's one of the things that I love about the grimoire tradition moving forward is there's so much collaboration and cooperation. We're building on each other's work.
One of the best places to start, I think, just to give listeners a little hint as to what you have done, is in the Materia Magica section. And when it comes to consecrating all the magical tools and ritual implements, you share some of your practical innovations. So, for example, you created a consecration of the censer or the oil burner, as this is not found in the grimoires. So you created this and you went to one of the oldest sources to do it, where you used a quote from Isaiah chapter 57, verses 9 through 10. David, could you recite this consecration for the listeners and maybe break down what's going on here?
You journeyed to the king with oil and multiplied your perfumes. You sent your envoys far off and sent down even to Sheol. You were wearied with the length of your way, but you did not say it is hopeless. You found new life for your strength, and so you were not faint. I just love that piece. I mean, I've read the Bible cover to cover a number of times in my life, and every time I find out new bits that jump out at me and I really like that bit, that quote. It speaks to you. This, I mean, right at the start, you journey to the king with oil. Well, you journey to the king. It's implying the burning of it and multiplied your perfumes, those fragrances that attract the spirits, but also it's to the king. So, there's the implication of the divine, of God in that line as well. You sent your envoys far off. Well, when you're doing conjuration, you are calling for envoys from far off, even to Sheol, hell. So it also includes the infernals. You were wearied with the length of your way. Well, conjuration can be very hard work. The preparation takes a long time. The conjurations can take ages. But you did not say it is hopeless. You found new life for your strength, and so you were not faint. It's that thing of the inspiration. The fragrances themselves, they don't just attract the spirits, they also uplift your spirits during the ceremony, during the conjuration. I just felt there's so many bits in these couple of verses that fit in different ways. It was just a really good quote to use for the anointing. Otherwise, it just fitted really well. I'm not going to fiddle with it. You might think, the phraseology sounds slightly weird, but then when you start looking at all the different lines, and the bits in it, actually, it all kind of flows really well as that consecration, in my opinion. So I was just drawn to it, and then every time I was looking at it, I liked it for a different reason.
David, this just popped into my head, but it's something you and I were chatting about before. Can you share about the fact that what you were just doing there by drawing from the book of Isaiah, that's literally what pseudo Agrippa in the fourth book of occult philosophy encourages people to do. He even says, I think the example used in the fourth book is either fire or water, but he says, look, pull from the Bible, pull from the text, effectively embrace this verbal power that comes from all of these different scriptures and powerful texts. Can you share about, by being innovative, by drawing and creating your own consecrations, that is part of the Solomonic tradition itself? Would that be somewhat fair?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at so many of the conjurations, particularly the longer ones, and they are full of biblical references. There's references to events that occurred, to characters that are in there, to places, to the rivers. There are so many biblical references within the consecrations that it's exactly the same thing. You look at Solomonic Pentacles, you look at magical seals, you look at magic circles, and there's quotes from mainly the Psalms, but also other quotes in the Bible. The Psalms obviously are a big favourite, but there's all these biblical quotes used as well. So it is totally part of the tradition of finding things that encapsulate what you are trying to do and say, because it's been there all the way through the grimoires. So you are continuing that process, but you're also at the same time personalizing it, as Pseudo Agrippa suggests. Like you are putting your own flavor in whilst being true to the flow of the tradition.
You, David, do such an amazing job in the book outlining the specific consecrations of all the major magical implements in the book. And you very usefully, might I add, classify the consecrations according to the perishables like candles, incense, oil, and water, and imperishables like the sword and the robe. So 2 follow-up questions here. The first is, since many ritual implements, it says in the grimoires, they should be sprinkled with holy water and passed through perfume or flame, what order would you recommend people move in, starting with the core consecrations that they should be focused on first before they move on to other consecrations?
Well, yeah, the salt and water, the oil, the perfumes are the ones I think that are best done first. Now, you could say there's a chicken egg thing here with there I'm going to be in the circle in my robe, but if that robe isn't consecrated, there's an obvious answer to that, which is when you get out of your ritual bath beforehand, having done all your preparation, you go to your magic circle, you don't put anything on, and you do those consecrations naked. Solves the problem. Then you have those perishables, which can be used subsequently for consecrating sword, robe, etc., and all the other items which need to be done.
That leads, David, to the next follow-up question, which is, when it comes to consecrating materia magica, one of the key elements, of course, in any ritual is consecrating a circle. And so someone might wonder, how can I consecrate a magical circle without first having a consecrated sword on hand to trace around the perimeter and the inside writing? Any advice, David, on that?
A consecration circle where you're consecrating items is somewhat different to a conjuration circle. And so from that perspective, the focus is on it, in a sense, it's being a contained, pure space. You're not having to think about calling something into the crystalline, the triangle. So you do not really need the sword in the same way. You can still activate the circle through the intonation of the divine names, through the visualization of the white flames, etc., working around it before you then do your consecration. So the circle has been activated and is ready for use, but you have not used the sword because you are not making it a barrier in the same way. the activation will still keep out anything untoward, any sort of wandering spirits from coming in, but you're not actively, trying to make it this sort of impenetrable fortress that it is for when you're doing, conjuration.
To that very point, David, some grimoires, as you were saying, like drawing spirits into crystals, do not call for a sword, but rather you trace the perimeter, the circumference of the circle with an ebony wand, for example. So not every Solomonic grimoire, as you've talked about, requires a sword as well. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I mean, there are some instances where you use a wand. You see that particularly with some of the fairy stuff as well, where, you're using a wand rather than a sword because of their aversion to the iron. So, yes, not all of them, but the majority, you have the sword. The ebony wand's interesting because, of course, ebony was sacred to Hermes, for example, and it makes you wonder about all those possible earlier connections from antiquity, that you're using something that's so associated with, the magician's psychopomp as part of the creation of your circle.
One of the things I find fascinating in the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, both yourself and Dr. Skinner talk about, in a goetic operation, you can use inside the circle, placed on the table of practice, a crystal. And a spirit, I know Dr. Skinner has mentioned this before on the podcast, a spirit can manifest inside the crystal even when you trace that protective barrier, because it is not the actual spirit, as he mentions, and you mention in the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, but it is a reflection of the spirit. Is there anything you can share for listeners who might be thinking, okay, so you trace the perimeter to keep the spirits out, but yet a crystal inside the circle can still have a reflection of the spirit? Anything to add to what's in the Goetia of Dr. Rudd?
Yeah, I mean, I gave the analogy of it being like a phone call. When we're doing conjuration, the seal with the sigil that you put underneath your crystal is the phone number. Your crystal or mirror is your phone, and the conjurations are the rings of the phone. So you're inside and you're making a phone call, and your receiver, the crystal, is also inside. So from that perspective, it makes sense that they could do that. I mean, I've done conjurations with a spirit like that in the circle, where it's been a circle inside the circle with the crystal in, for example, on a small table. And it works equally well. In some ways, it can almost be better because it's easier for the scryer to make that connection without having to look outside of the circle. But I think for general conjuration, unless you have experience, it's better to have that triangle outside of the circle, personally. It does work and it is mentioned in places, but I do think that, generally keep the triangle outside the circle unless there is a reason for having that circle inside. I mean, I've commonly in the past, I did do the circle inside the circle for the Olympics, for example. That worked really well. I didn't use an external triangle for the Olympic spirits, but used that circle inside the circle for conjuration of the Olympic spirits.
Ah, that's fascinating. So you place that right in there, that spiritus loci, that focal point, whether it's a crystal or an external triangle inside the circle, and yet you still have that barrier protection as well during the ritual.
Yeah, but like I say, I had a circle rather than a triangle for the Olympics because the nature of the Olympics did not feel like, one, it required it, and two, because of their positive nature in the engagements I've always had with them, it almost felt like it'd be a bit rude to stick them inside the triangle, inside the circle. And, you do quite often use a circle rather than a triangle as the containment for your crystal or mirror when working with angelic forces. So I think the Olympics kind of fit into that category there. And so it was done as a respectful thing as well to show the Olympics that they were being invited and that constraint of the triangle was not part of the invitation.
To that very point, in the Janua Magica Reserata, the Ruddian provocations and the very long angelic conjurations, If memory serves, of course, there's a crystal. It doesn't tell you whether to place the crystal inside the circle or outside the circle, because it doesn't even mention a circle in the Janua Magica Reserata. It's simply a table with either a lamp behind it or 2 wax candles. So when it comes to operations like that, or angelic operations, do iron swords put off, or are they a sign of, as you say, perhaps disrespect to the spirits? Or if you're specifically talking angelic spirits, is there anything people should avoid?
I don't think it does put them off, because it's also a mark of your authority. And I once did Conjuration of Michael from Heptameron. And when the contact with Michael happened, so the whole blade of the sword gave like a white and gold flaming. It was absolutely stunning. It was beautiful. It's like, whoa, so Michael acknowledged his presence with a flaming sword, literally. I use the word coruscate because it's such a good word. The blade coruscated with white and gold flame that just danced across the whole of the blade and then faded. But it was like an incredible manifestation to have that experience. And yeah, there was no concern there. I mean, obviously, Michael likes his sword, so he's not going to be worried about you having a sword, for example. So no, I don't think it is an issue with the angelics to have a sword handy. That conjuration I did was actually for Joe Lisiewski. I mean, I mentioned to you before, the end of his life, we were friends. He was going to do this big Michael conjuration, and he asked if I would also do one. And I did that and asked stuff to assist with his conjuration. And yeah, that white and gold flame was just, I was like, holy shit. When you get that sort of phenomena, it's really mind blowing. And the other person in the circle also saw it. So it wasn't just like, oh, just me.
Yeah.
The person who was the seer saw it as well.
Wow.
That was really interesting. I mean, it was a shame he died when he did. I mean, he was a bit eccentric. He was devoting a lot of time to trying to work out how to build a time machine.
That is what I have read as well, is that he was so devoted and so interested in the sciences and the esoteric sciences that I suppose it might be fair to say it burned very hot. He was constantly thinking about these things. With that very operation you did with Dr. Joseph Lisiewski, you mentioned it was the Heptameron. So this would be the shorter conjuration of the day of Michael. Instead of, sometimes when you look at John Dee's work, the invocations can go on for pages and pages. And that might be necessary, as you and Dr. Skinner say, to build up the magical momentum and tension. But can a shorter conjuration, like in the Heptameron, in your experience, also provide those results?
It can, but that one, it had to be said a few times. And then there was the oomph, there's the contact. It was like, ring, 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 ring. That's why the thing of I think I mentioned, but even sometimes having a chair in the circle, because, it can go on for hours and hours. It's like people who think, say a few words and they're there. Nah.
You say in the book, David, writing about the Heptameron, you mentioned that Jim Baker observed, quote, the list of necessary equipment for this specific grimoire for the Heptameron is also quite basic and lacks any obsessive requirements for its acquisition and consecration, a notable stumbling block or excuse for failure in later grimoires, unquote. And you say, this agrees with my views on just using what is essential and not fetishizing the equipment to the extent of obsession, end quote. This is such a powerful point. Can you share about how, for those aspiring mages and operators out there, how we cannot and why we should not fetishize or overemphasize tools, for example, like the lion skin belt and others?
Yeah, I mean, for this book, for Claves, the tools that are in there are just the ones that are needed for the practice. I don't see the point in having stuff that isn't needed, so it's just the things that are there. And it's very much a case of, I can understand the appeal of, for example, the lion skin belt, and I can appreciate that if someone put all the work in to making a lion skin belt, they would definitely generate a certain amount of magical momentum towards achieving success in their conjuration. However, I've never used a lion skin belt in my life in all the Go Easy conjurations I've done because I've never felt it was necessary. I think you can generate more than enough magical momentum for successful conjuration without obsessing over having to have a very specific bit of kit that is not necessarily essential. I mean, some things are essential. Your sword is essential for most Solomonic stuff, pretty much all. A robe is essential. Your larman is essential. Your crystal or mirror are essential. But having something that's basically saying to spirits, hey, look, I'm Hercules with the skin of the Nemean lion on me, so I'm invulnerable, is not essential in my book. I have known people they won't do conjuration because they haven't got their lion skin belt. And it can take them years to get it. And in those years, they could have been doing conjuration. It can be used as an excuse or a stumbling block, absolutely. If you go back from it, I talked about magical momentum before and in my encyclopedia, and I talk about it a bit more in this book. It's that whole idea of if you put enough into all the preparation, into the purification, into all the practice, the consecration, etc., you achieve enough magical momentum for a successful conjuration. You look at your timing and all the other things that go towards that. So you work on as many factors as possible to achieve that excess of magical momentum. As I said, having a lion skin belt will add some magical momentum there. But if you've already got enough, you don't need to worry about it. You don't need to go for that lion skin belt or that heart skin belt or whatever other item it may be. If you stick with the basics, the fundamentals, you can get by just fine. You really don't let it hold you back. It is frustrating that people have become so, oh my God, I must have this. Like I say, it's a nice thing and nothing against people having them, but don't let not having it stop you. Don't let it get in the way of doing it. You do not need that lion skin belt.
And we are going to definitely get more in depth on this very subject later. David, this just popped into my head. So it sounds like what you're saying is, of course, those are really nice things to have, but there are other huge things, vital factors that are at work here that are not necessarily about one particular materia magica. So, for example, it's like, what would you rather have? And this is a total false dichotomy, but please bear with me. It's like, would you rather be somebody who has an actual lion skin belt, but doesn't put any effort into purification, maybe fasting for just half a day and kind of being loose with the timing? Or would you rather be someone who has the key, the core materia magica, the sword, the robe, the phylactery, the crystal, let's say, and who has no lion skin belt, but they've put in a 9-day purification, for example, and they have the exact day and hour and minute and all the astrological timing? Would that be somewhat fair in terms of keeping the focus on the core issues, the core things that make magic work?
Yeah, absolutely. The timing, the consecrations, the purifications, that side of it, that is where you really build up your magical momentum. And also the fasting, as I talked about before, the electronic fast, not being distracted, not allowing your focus to be distracted during your preparation period, not being online, not gaming, not doing all these other things that distract your attention from, that conjuration. You should be minimizing your social contact and minimizing what you have to do to the bare minimum, for emails and things like that during that time. Staying off social media, like I say, gaming, all the rest of it, not going onto YouTube or TikTok or anything else.
You also augment and you extend, when it comes to materia magica, many of the consecrations. You are innovative while staying in the tradition. And I think here's a perfect example. You augment in the Key of Solomon, consecration of the sword. You also augment that with an updated and amended version of the consecration given in De Nigromantia. Someone who might only go by the book and say, I'm only using what's in the Key of Solomon for the consecration of the sword. They might bristle at that. They may ruffle their feathers as, wait, David Rankine's combining between De Nigromantia and the Key of Solomon. But can you share about how this is actually very natural and maybe share about some of the figures? Like, Dr. John Dee borrowing from earlier sources like the Sworn Book. And I mean, it just seems like it's natural to do this.
Yeah, I mean, the sword is such an important part that the consecration in the Key of Solomon is like a couple of lines. And the sword, to me, just deserves so much more than that. It is such a key part of what you're doing. And the consecration de Nugromantia is a lovely consecration. It's a lot longer and a lot more impactful as well. So although it's not your Key of Solomon one, I think it's a lot better. And so, like you say, amending that and putting that in, I think it gives the sword the due it deserves. Of all that goes in with the conjurer, that sword is like pretty much number one on the list of things they need to have. So it was really important to me to have a really nice consecration for the sword. And as you say, look at the big one that we're still all looking forward to, an English translation of Summa Sacra Magicae. Look what Ganellis did with that, with taking things like the Sworn Book of Honorius and these various other texts, and Shir Coma, the Macabre text bits from that, and merging all this together and weaving this incredible 800-piece practical magic text from a range of what was available of different like grimoires and things at the time to make this coherent whole that's like his system of magic. So it's something that's there in there. And Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, Agrippa didn't really write that so much as collate most of the material together and edit around it, if you look at it. So this whole thing of building and weaving together what's come from the grimoire tradition has always been full of people experimenting and finding what synergies work. And this book is, if you like, my synergies that have worked, or where there's been a gap that I've not found anything for, like the consecration of the censer, also consecration of the robe, because there isn't one for that anywhere. Then I adapted or created one to put in over the years, because everything in that circle should be consecrated. Absolutely everything. That's why there's things like consecrations even of personal jewelry. If you're going in and you've got bodily piercings or stuff, they should be consecrated. Everything that goes in that circle is consecrated. Again, it's part of the flow of the tradition, that whole synergy process. None of the grimoires, by and large, stand alone. They've all built on what's gone before, or adapted things from before, or new ideas that the people at the time tried out and put in that worked for them.
I believe the last time you were on the podcast, modern updates. You are so good with modern updates that if you're entering a consecrated circle with contact lenses, right, you should consecrate those. Everything should be consecrated.
Yeah, I mean, I did that back in the 90s. I came up with that consecration for the lenses. For many years, I wore contact lenses rather than glasses, and I would just batch consecrate. I'd have a whole load consecrated, and then the container kept in silk in the altar, and pop them in the beginning of the ritual, not just for conjurations, but for any magical ritual that I did. Because if you're in a magic circle, be it for grimoire conjuration or any other magical type of practice, things should be consecrated.
Yes. So listeners, I hope you appreciate that as much as I do. That's one of the big themes that David, you're sharing in this tome, is the things that people tend to get hung up on, the lion skin belt, or things that can turn into stumbling blocks. There are other things at work. And you, David, extend this theme to seals and to sigils. And you have a striking insight that you share in the book that not a single intelligence sigil, a planetary intelligence sigil done by Agrippa, is actually correct by the rules of drawing them, and nobody ever questioned it. So can you share, how did Agrippa draw the sigils incorrectly? And then what is the key point, the key lesson about if you're an operator and you're still using one of these incorrect or quote unquote incorrect sigils? Can you share about what's going on here?
Yeah, I'll start with a little story. So back in 2008, I was going to do a Tyrial conjuration, the Mercurial Intelligence, and I didn't happen to have any books at hand with the sigil in. I thought, that's no problem. I'll just do the cameo and I'll draw it up. And I drew it up. And I thought, hang on. And then I looked at it in the grip and I looked at mine. It's like, they're not the same. I looked at mine. It's like, no, I've done it correctly. And I realized that Agrippa, well, one of the things he does in some, but not all of them, is, most of the names tend to end in IAL, Hagiel, Tyriel, Agiel. And for a lot of them, that I and the A, which would be 10 and a 1, numerically, it combines into an 11. And so instead of the sigil being drawn, say, from 3 to 10 to 1 to 30 or whatever it might be, he goes 3, 11, 30. So he's removed a point of the sigil out. So that's one thing he does. Another thing is that system of sigil drawing, it's called 8 Becker, because it's a 3 by 3 square with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's the Hebrew letters. So the ones that start with a 1. So A, Aleph, 1, Yod, 10, I, Q, Quoth, 100. So they're all in the 1 box. And likewise, B, Bet, 2, K, Kaf, 20, R, Resh, 200. So 8 Becker, that's where the name comes from. You knock any zeros off the end that aren't in there. So, for example, if you have Lamed, which has a numerical value of 30, and that is in a 5 by 5 square that only goes to 25, that 30 becomes a 3. But if that's in a 6 by 6 square, which goes from 1 to 36, you don't knock the 0 off because there is 30 in that square. And that's something else that Agrippa does, is he knocks the zeros off when they shouldn't be knocked off. So again, that then changes the shape of the sigil. So some of them he does both of these things of the IA or knocking the 0 off when it doesn't need to be knocked off. Some of them he does one, so they all, there isn't a consistency, but they're all wrong by that system if you're following the rules of Becker. I wrote an article back then actually about it, and then I myself forgot about that. And when a few years back I was doing the Conjurations, I used the wrong sigils as well. Again, the Agrippa ones. They worked, but when I was writing Chavez, one night in my dreams, I reminded myself about the article that I needed to go back and dig it out and put the corrected versions in the book. So there's an example of my obsessed mind drawing on things in my unconscious that needed to go in the book. I had this mental image with the intelligences, them all hanging out somewhere, let's say in like a spirit bar, and somebody conjuring one of them and using the actual, by the rules of the system, conjuration, and them sort of looking at each other and going, somebody's contacting you on your old number. God, nobody's rung that for 500 years since Agrippa changed the sigils. Oh, well, let's go and see what they want then. But because nobody questioned Agrippa, he's such a big figure, nobody questioned him. So it's also an important thing there to always question everybody, no matter how great an authority they are. And so everybody was using that. It's almost like Agrippa forced a change of number onto with their sigils. And everybody was calling them using that sigil. So I think they just accepted that even if it wasn't the one that had been used before Agrippa, this was what everyone was now using to call them. So it became an acceptable, contact sigil for them. So although it wasn't initially, it's not correct by the rules, it became what they accepted as part of the interface for contacting them.
So, David, you have been sharing with the listeners a lot of excellent background regarding Agrippa and the Planetary Intelligences. And you were just sharing about the incorrect sigils compared to how you might use the numerology to create a planetary sigil. Do you have any theories, David, about why Agrippa might have used those quote unquote wrong sigils? You shared that it could have been a number switch and perhaps a collapsing of two numbers into one. But what are some of the other possibilities out there?
The two that really strike me are, he did it as a blind from the point of view of, being a good Christian, as it were. So he didn't want to give quite the correct contact sigil. or he worked with intelligences and they gave him variant sigils and said, this is what you should use to contact us. And he put in the ones that he was given, which don't fully obey the rules of Becker, but were the ones that those intelligences said, use this to contact us. And he thought, okay, then I'll put in what I've been told as the contact sigil. I think that is a possibility. I mean, I didn't think of that when I was writing the book, but it has since struck me that that also is a possibility.
And as a very quick follow-up, David, for the listeners out there who might be thinking, oh, well, this is UPG, right? Unverified personal gnosis, and this is based potentially on feedback that only, say, Agrippa got. Well, could you share with the listeners that feedback, that unique feedback not found in the grimoires, is part of Solomonic tradition? For example, in drawing spirits into crystals, you should ask the spirit during the interrogation phase what times they prefer versus the grimoiric times, and also the seals as well. What is your true seal? So is it fair to say, David, that this potential feedback one-on-one is part of the tradition?
Absolutely. And I would argue that it's not UPG, it's PG, because the spirit has given you that as the contact. And it is verified through the contact with the spirit and through subsequent use. So for another person, it might be UPG, but for you, it's part of your engaging with that spirit. As you say, like with timings and things, and the spirit might say, actually, I particularly want you to burn this resin for me, or give you other information that facilitates making that hospitable environment for the spirit and making it easier for a future spirit contact.
I love that. It is PG. That's a beautiful, beautiful way to look at it. And what could be more important than that? So, David, would it be fair to say, for everybody out there who might be listening and preparing, say, for a ritual or even researching, and they're thinking to themselves, okay, the Lemegetans Goetia, do I use what's found in the Lemegetans Goetia from the mid-1600s? Do I use the sigils, the seals of one of the 72 found in the Goetia of Dr. Rudd? The angelic seals of Michael, Gabriel, Raphael? Do I use the ones found in the 1559 Heptameron, or do I go to the Elucidarium Necromantiae manuscripts like VRL 1115 and use those? If what you're saying here is such a powerful point, is that the actual historical fidelity to the sigil itself, since you can have success using an outdated number, as you say, then what is going on here? What do you think are the operative or the critical forces that make the ritual work, even if it's not the original sigil? Is it sincerity? Is it intention? Is it the magical momentum? I mean, what is going on here?
I use another one of my favorite analogies I've come up with. When we're doing conjuration, the seal with the sigil that you put underneath your crystal is the phone number. Your crystal or mirror is your phone, and the conjurations are the rings of the phone. Like I say, so I had this image of like, they had one line and Agrippa opened another phone line. That one line stopped being used and everyone was using the other. So people were creating enough magical momentum that I think the spirits accepted, okay, people are trying to contact us. Initially, it might have been, they're not using what we're used to, but they're doing everything else right, so we'll go with it. And I think after a while, it just got accepted as this is what they're using now. You know, if we're going to actually communicate with them when they contact us, this is what they're all using. So this is the contact number now. This is what we go with. I think that variations in seals and sigils over time, even over short periods of time, like a few years, they can be different in different manuscripts of the same grimoire. Yeah, I think if everything else, if there is enough magical momentum, as long as that sigil is something that those spirits have familiarity with, I think it can still work. If the rest of the magical momentum is built up to a high degree, then that has less of a negative or detrimental effect if the sigil is not quite right.
David, I absolutely love that analogy, and it's because of you I'm now not going to be able to think about mechanics or phone lines the same way again. And you continue to raise the bar in a fascinating aspect of your tome. There are so many. One of them is you offer a very interesting option to the classic 6-step Solomonic method. This is a method that yourself and Dr. Stephen Skinner have articulated in books like The Goetia of Dr. Rudd, for example. And it walks through everything, the 6 steps, and the 6 steps are found in so many grimoires, everything from step 1, Consecratio Dei, which is the initial preparations, fasting, but also prayers to God, seeking divine protection. Then there's Invocatio, which is calling down perhaps angelic or other spirits to lend their offices for the successful binding and calling of a spirit. And then the center of the ritual, step 3, is the evocatio, where you are specifically using, say, the vinculum Salomonis or specific nomina magica for the successful conjuring of the actual target spirit. And then step 4 is the reception of the spirit, also known as constrictio. Step 5 is binding of the spirit and also issuing a charge to the spirit. So asking the spirit what you are seeking to be accomplished through the office of the spirit, and that's called legatio. And then finally, step 6 is the licentia, the license to depart. But you, David, fascinatingly in this book, suggest an optional step 0, if you will, something at the very beginning of the ritual that you title the license to remain. Can you share with the listeners what is this license to remain and how did you come up with it?
It came to me a number of years back. I was thinking about more people do work with spirits, and I knew more people involved in the ATRs, and if you have your own spiritual court, and even like house spirits and spirits of places, that if you start doing banishing some things, you're kicking everything out, and that's really pretty rude if things actually live there. And I thought, rather than license to depart, you need a license to remain. Before you start doing the magic, you should do a license to remain. Like of any spirit which by right of invitation or dwelling lives in that place, that you give them the license to remain before you get into it, so that, if you're doing banishing, they are not affected by the banishing. And likewise, if you're working outdoors, I say in the book, it ceases to be optional and becomes compulsory. Because if you're going out into nature to do your conjuration, which always was done in the past, if you're going into somebody else's home, effectively, you're going into the woods or old ruins or things like that, the genie loci, the elementals, fairies, whoever might live there, you really don't want to pee them off before you start your practice. You should have already made contact with them anyway, made sure they're going to be happy with what you're doing, made develop a bit of a relationship with them, make sure the place is clean and tidy, see if there's offerings they would like, etc., so that they're going to be fine with you working in their space. But that license to remain, again, absolutely, you do that before you start doing big stuff in their space, because you don't know what the capacities of those spirits are, and it's incredibly rude and disrespectful to go out into nature and tell the spirits that live there to F off. So the license to remain is it built up from those thoughts, and the version I developed is based on using the divine names but sort of the ones that are in the pentagram ritual, because that's a very common ritual that's used. They also happen to be names that I've put onto the magic circle that's in the book. So again, it's something that people could adapt. If they were using a different banishing or a magic circle with different names, they might change the names that they say in the license to remain and adapt it for their own practice. But for me, once I thought about it, I thought, why has nobody done this before? It's actually so obvious. It's so essential as part of the process of having respect for not just the spirits that you work with, but the spirits that you are surrounded by. It's just something that had to be done there. In the future, if I'm remembered for my works, I really hope that the license to remain is one of the things that I'm remembered for, because once it came to me and I created it, I just thought, this is something that should have been here for a long time already.
It's a courteous element. It shows respect to the natural environment. It shows respect to any spirits either in your home or outside in nature. David, this just popped into my head. When it comes to the license to remain, in addition to the actual words that are used in the license to remain, as you said, could this involve offering, milk, honey, incense, maybe having a dialogue with some of the spirits? Is there anything else in the license to remain that you want listeners to know?
I did write about that in the book where I said, if you're working outdoors, as well as doing the license, you should do all those things I've just said, like go build up a relationship with your local spirits, make sure that their space is clean and not littered, make off the appropriate offerings. I've worked at places where the spirits, one thing I have noticed is they usually want local stuff. I remember one place and the spirits, they wanted hazelnuts, but they had to be hazelnuts that were local. They didn't want hazelnuts that came from another country. They wanted hazelnuts from trees that were in the soil of their country. So it's interesting. I found spirits tend to want offering things like nuts, apples and things, but not that have come from another country onto their land. They want stuff that's from their land because that's where they are. So the offerings should reflect the energy of the land that you are working in and that they live in. You give them offerings appropriate to that. If it's honey, ideally, if you can purchase it from a local, you can usually find someone who sells local honey, which then has the pollen of the flowers and plants from the surrounding area. Don't just go and buy, like some cheap, crappy runny honey from a supermarket. Source out and find someone who's got bees nearby that you can buy it from, and that you're offering that honey, that those spirits might have even interacted with those bees, for all you know. I think it is important to, when you are making offerings like that for spirits of place, that you consider the nature of the offerings you make. See what they seem to be telling you they want, source locally for those things for them.
When it comes to showing respect for local spirits, spirits of your local forest, your local topography, rivers, streams, in the fourth book of Occult Philosophy, I believe that there is a section that describes, literally, effectively almost hosting a banquet for the spirits of the area, of the forests and of the streams, of, laying out a table and setting chairs where the spirit, and inviting the spirits to partake of those offerings. So it just seems like those relationships, because these are not the target spirits, these spirits are always here. So it's of paramount importance to protect those relationships, if not just for yourself and the individual spirits, for the environment, for the forest, for the place around the area where you're working.
Yep, absolutely. And I mean, once you are doing spirit work, you tend to become a lot more sensitive to those other spirits. And I think that respect tends to be naturally engendered through, once you're doing conjuration or other forms of spirit work. It's something that usually comes in, but it's a good thing to mention for people who don't have the familiarity, because it might not be that obvious, and someone might think, oh yeah, I'll just go and buy, like I say, like some random honey off the shelf or some nuts that might have been imported from halfway around the world or something, No, take time and think and make the effort to engage with those spirits, because you might find that you end up developing really strong relationships with those local spirits who can teach you all sorts of things themselves, which might not be stuff that's in any grimoire, but it's going to be just as damned important.
Punctuated within these deep lessons in your book are very practical pieces of wisdom. And in the tome, you mentioned that, quote, when someone's preparing for a conjuration, for an operation, quote, any phones in the house should be unplugged at the socket and all mobiles switched off. Ideally, turn off your television and internet router too, unquote. Can you just share for the listeners, and you touched on this a little bit in the Grimoire Encyclopedia as well, but why is it so important to unplug electronics at things like the Wi-Fi internet, for example, and phones? Why is that so critical?
Well, the first thing is some spirits tend to interfere with electronics and things can go bang. and you don't want things going bang in the middle of a conjuration. But also, the signals are unseen, spirits are unseen. Might they interfere? They might. They might not. Why take that chance? When you're doing conjuration, you are trying to make as hospitable an environment as possible. If you're indoors, it's not just a nice fragrance from whatever you're burning that's appropriate, as part of the attraction process, that the place smells nice for them. It's making everything else. It's creating that stillness. And even if, electrical signals and all the other things have no impact on spirits, the fact is there is a busyness about technology. There's always a sense it's very busy. And for conjuration, you want stillness. You want as much peace and quiet as possible. And I think it just contributes to making a more, as I say, hospitable, respectful environment for trying to bring the spirits into for that engagement.
Would that also, David, be a reason why I know yourself and Dr. Skinner have mentioned in numerous tomes that when it comes to isolation and, if you can, being, deep in the forest or simply away from other people, getting that distance, does that also reduce the busyness and yet increase the respectable environment, the receptivity for the spirits?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I did talk about in the book, we're talking about the magic circle and how magic circles were made using like the 4 parts, which then got tied together and transported out, because making a circle on the ground, on uneven ground, etc., it's going to be very unlikely you're going to get it right. You're going to find a nice big area that's totally flat that you can use your chalk or what have you on. So having a pre-constructed circle that you then just fit together when you get to wherever it may be, working out in the wild is definitely the ideal, I think, for doing conjuration. There's something about being out there and having the wind around you. It just immediately feels more receptive to the spirits. I mean, it does bring in one of the things that I mentioned in the book, which is while working outdoors, before you start your, say, week of preparation, check the long-range weather forecast, make sure there's not going to be a high chance of seriously bad weather that will interfere. Only happened to me once. I was doing something on the Cornish moors, and we didn't check the weather, and it had been fine when we went out, and we started setting up, and then wind and torrential rain started coming in. Candles wouldn't stay alight, even though they're inside lamps. The charcoal wouldn't stay alight. We just had to admit defeat in the end because the weather was just too severe and we couldn't do it. So when I was doing the book, I was reminded of that instance. Remind people that if they are going outdoors, do check the weather ahead of time. Even if it's not 100% accurate, if it tells you there's likely to be majorly bad weather, you might choose to set it to another time. Being out in the wilds when it gets really unpleasant, A, you can't effectively do conjuration, and B, it's not a lot of fun.
Indeed. Touche. So for all of those listeners out there who are very, very good at meticulously calculating the appropriate astrological time for, the day and hour of Mercury, let's say, and Virgo is right over the horizon, or Gemini, and it's perfect, and there's a waxing moon and everything's great. Don't forget to check the weather forecast for rain or for heavy winds or anything that might disrupt your ritual. That's such a practical piece of advice, David. I have done personally and worked with others rituals in the heat of summer, where even at night, it is sweltering and there are bugs everywhere. I have done rituals where it is extremely, extremely cold, where you are trying to figure out how much 100% linen cloth can I wrap around myself to stay warm and yet also not bring anything artificial into the circle. And so this poses the question to someone like you, as decades and decades of experience. Is there a specific time of year that you, I suppose I don't want to say enjoy, but that seems to be the most conducive if there are spirits that are not seasonal dependent? Is there a particular time, spring, autumn, summer? Is there anything that you find that you enjoy doing?
Spring and autumn, I like those two. Around the equinoxes, I'm very partial to, those sort of turning points of the year where there's that sort of like dark balance. But they're my favourite times. And weather-wise, they tend to be not too severe. You've usually got past the severity of winter when you're getting towards the spring equinox. Usually, not always. And at the autumn equinox, it's still usually the weather's okay and you're not hitting too much heavy rain or snow by that point. So yeah, those are my preferred times if there aren't other prerequisites.
Again, you are pushing the boundaries in this book. You also created and modified a Conjuration of the Scryer, taken from a divination in CLM 849, the Munich Handbook of Necromancy, that I know many listeners are familiar with. And you incorporate this Conjuration of the Scryer into your rituals. Can you share why this is so important? Because I think some people might think of drawing spirits into crystals, for example, where you consecrate the actual crystal itself. But you really want to stress as well, hey, you need to make sure that the scryer themselves is being consecrated by the operator. Why is this so important?
That consecration of the scryer, I think it's very much about ensuring the scryer, it's helping them get in that mindset. And sometimes I take the role of conjurer, sometimes I take the role of scryer, depending on who I'm working with. And I personally think I really like it. It's also re-emphasizes the bond between the two, between the conjurer and the scryer in the process. So it's almost like a bit of punctuation in the sentence of the whole process, where for me it's like the moment of stillness where the conjurer does the consecration of the scryer, and it's like everything just goes into like stillness. It's almost like the inspiration of breath with that. For me, that's how I kind of see it. It's really, for me, adds to the process and emphasizes the importance of the role of the scryer. What the scryer is doing is being that channel of communication. And so that extra consecration of the scryer is acknowledging that the scryer, in a sense, he's the so below of the as above of the crystal ball. At that point, the scryer is like a living receptor for the communication of the spirit. And so I think it's particularly important to do everything you can to make that moment as magical and effective as possible.
David, you describe so lucidly in the book, while this is going on, while the scryer has been consecrated, the preparations are made, everything's ready, it's the right day, it's the right hour, all of the materia magica are in place, and it's time to actually start the conjuration. You share that, and I think this is something that has thrown off a lot of people over the years in terms of how the heck do you actually speak the conjuration? How do you recite the conjuration? And you share in your book and say, quote, "The conjuration should be spoken in a clear, firm, and steady voice," unquote. I think a lot of people have this as a stumbling block. They might say, well, what does that mean? Do you vibrate like in the Golden Dawn? Do you sing like an opera singer? Do you speak in a very low, solemn tone? If you look in the fourth book of occult philosophy, Pseudo Agrippa says to, quote, "Invocate to the spirit which he desireth with a gentle and loving enchantment to all the coasts of the world," unquote. So could you perhaps recite part or one of the conjurations within this tome, maybe with the pacing and the way you would call a spirit, and share a little bit about why you do it this way?
Sure. I'll go with part of the conjuration of Tyrael, seeing as it was that Tyrael sigil that made me realize that they were all wrong. Or not wrong, but weren't following the guidelines of the system. O you benevolent intelligence of celestial light, dignified and by nature angelic, who are known or called by the name Tyriel, and said to be of the nature and office of the planet or star called Mercury, when by celestial position it shall be both essentially well dignified and fortified, with all others your substitute, the present intelligences or dignified powers of light, properly belonging, residing in, or otherwise appertaining to your mansion, orders, hierarchy, from the superior to the inferior, and serving the Most High God in your respective orders and offices as mediums of divine grace and mercy, and as in charge, commanded and appointed, we the servants also of the highest, reverently here present in his holy fear, do earnestly beseech, humbly request, strongly invocate, call forth, and powerfully move you to visible appearance in, by, and through these excellent, sacred, and divine names of your God. Din, Doni, Asboga. Even the omnipotent, immortal, immense, incomprehensible, and most high God and Lord of hosts, Jehovah, before whom the whole choir of heaven continually sings, O Mapalaman, Hallelujah.
I can feel the weight of that, David. That is incredible. Could you, just as a quick follow-up to that, incredibly powerful, share some of the key things? And I'll just give you my amateur impressions, which is I'm noticing, as you say in the book, it's a very clear tone. It's a very firm tone. You make sure to incant or actually vibrate or sing, if you will, the name of the spirit and also the nomina magica, the holy names of God. Can you just share what are these key things that you just recited for us, those key elements?
The vibration or intonation of the nomina magica, divine names, names of spirits, I think is one of the most important parts of the conjuration. And what's important is that you find the right pitch for yourself. So you feel that vibration in your chest, in your body. It's not about volume. It's not a contest to be loud. It's about finding the right pitch so that your body is resonating with those divine names, with those nomina magica. So you are creating a harmony between yourself and those influences, which is then reflected in your speech and in your intonation, so that you are expressing your resonance with the conjuration through your voice. So for me, that is one of the key things, is learning to find the right pitch for you. And like I say, it is really not about volume. It's about where you feel that in your chest, in your body. You can actually feel, your body vibrating inside. Then you have hit the right note, the right point for you. That is the tone that you should be doing those divine names, spirit names, nomina magica in. Aside from that, it's always good to rehearse the conjurations a number of times beforehand, because often a lot of them, there's not that much punctuation. Some of them do have a lot of commas, but some there's not much. So you have to work out where the breaks are. Otherwise you find yourself keep going. Oh my God, I'm going to run out of breath. And you have to practice so that you can see where you're going to put the breaks in. There's no reason why you couldn't actually just go through and mark, put little red commas or something in on your conjuration, just as a reminder from practice. This is where it's a good point to have that in breath and then carry on, so you can have a good flow. Because like I say, they are very long sentences. You need to practice and maintain a flow. And that flow and that hitting the pitch combined really, contribute to make the conjuration hum, as it were, to attract the attention more of the spirit that you're calling.
You also mentioned that using seals for dream contact to aid in the conjuration process and how all of these things are related. Can you tell us a bit about using seals for dream contact?
Yeah, I came across this in when I was working on a collection of magical secrets back in 2009, I think it was. There was this technique there for having an angel for each day of the week and making this seal and putting it under your pillow and reciting a prayer before going to bed for contacts to get answers from the angel in your dreams. And I loved this, and I thought it's such an appropriate thing to have there. And so I adapted it for the work with intelligences. And then when Stephen Skinner and I were working on Cunning Man's Grimoire, we find in there, 2 centuries before the technique in Collection of Magical Secrets, there is a dream charm for contacting Tyrael, the Mercurial Planetary Intelligence, which has like his sigil and the seal of Mercury and the Mercurial camea on this charm, with a prayer to say for putting it under your pillow, and that you recite this prayer, you burn incense and things, you don't have supper. It gives instructions on using this charm. And it was pretty much exactly what I had adapted the stuff from Collection of Magical Secrets into for working with intelligences. So I was really, really chuffed by that. I mean, it is possible, of course, because I did see that manuscript back in about 2005, that it lodged in my unconscious. And so it could have prompted it to sort of something about it to resurface, so that when I adapted it, I was adapting it with my unconscious mind knowing that it existed. And so I used that model without realizing that I was just drawing on something I'd seen in the past. I'm not claiming great wisdom for that. It's quite possible that, say, I unconsciously recollected the idea. And yeah, there's a double purpose there, really. One is, particularly if you haven't done Conjuration before, making the seal, which is described in the book, and using that during your purificatory preparatory period, the week before the Conjuration, can help with developing your connection with the spirit, the intelligence that you're going to call up. I think it's particularly important for the Scryer to do it, because that's the person who's obviously going to be engaging and communicating with the intelligence, but also to do it afterwards. And then particularly if you don't, for whatever reason, it doesn't turn up, and it provides an easy access for that intelligence if it, for whatever reason, wasn't able to turn up. And, we don't know the secret life of spirits. We don't know what the spirits get up to when they're not. We can't just assume they're sitting around waiting to be called by a magician to do stuff, and that they don't, have their own existence, that they get on with doing whatever it is they do. So I think sometimes if someone does a conjuration, you can have done everything right, but the spirit might not turn up because it might just be busy. Or in those instances, it might send, one of the spirits under it in the hierarchy, and the intelligences do have spirits under them who, as I mentioned elsewhere, can request a familiar spirit of that hierarchy. So yeah, it helps provide access for dream communication from that intelligence afterwards. And, when we're dreaming, it's a much easier place for spirits to communicate with us. So from that perspective, you are kind of opening the door even more, shining a light for the intelligence, saying, yeah, okay, you weren't able to come, but please, come and give me those answers in my dreams. And if you are using the seal, have pen and paper or what have you near the bed, because you may wake up in the night frantically needing to write stuff down so that you don't forget it.
One of the things as well that you talk about in the book so well is staying true to the tradition, but also being innovative. And in that same vein, you share about updating effectively some of the materia magica, some of the ritualistic implements or implements that are used in the making and consecrating of other ritual implements. And this includes things like the pen, for example. You mentioned that in the Key of Solomon, from 500, 600, 700 years ago, there was a use of a quill But today we can use a pen that's a modern pen, but you say that the key thing is that that pen, whatever it is set aside. It is dedicated only for ritualistic writing. And another example of this update is the circle. You say that you can use, say, a linoleum circle if you are outside. And I know that some listeners in the past who might be really focused, David, on quote unquote, all natural materials, or quote unquote, I want to avoid, quote, artificial materials. They may look at this, excellent advice, and say, well, but don't modern pens have plastic? And if I use a linoleum circle, aren't there other things in there besides, pure cotton cloth, let's say? What would you say to maybe some of the listeners out there in terms of this issue of quote unquote artificiality?
Well, I would say that magic takes on the technology of the age, and magicians in the past, if they had access to things, I think would have used them if it made their work easier. And I find artificial is such a loaded term, because anything that gets made from materials on the earth is not artificial, it's just constructed. So from that perspective, yes, there are ecological issues with plastics, and we're all aware of that, microplastics in the sea, and there are steps being taken to try and reduce these things. But from the point of view of if a pen has plastic in it or linoleum, then I would say it's perfectly fine. I mean, you can be a purist and get a pen that doesn't have any plastic in. It should be a nice pen anyway. You don't want like a cheap biro as your magical pen. It should be something that looks good. It has that sense of quality to it, because you're going to be writing divine names with it. You're going to be writing all these magical things. So it should be a nice pen. So from that perspective, I think if it does have a bit of plastic in it, I don't see that as an issue. It's just a product of our time. The grimoires have proliferated through modern technology, through universities and libraries, putting manuscripts online. In the past, somebody had to hand copy from somebody else. That is not the case anymore because we have this technology. And I think one of the things that's driven the grimoire revival is modern technology and the internet. So again, it's magic taking on the technology of the age. So for me, it's very much a case of don't get too hung up on minor issues, focus on actually doing the magic. If plastic is an issue for you, find an alternative that you're comfortable with.
David, that is wonderful advice. And listeners, I hope you appreciate that as much as I do. David, we definitely have some listener questions for you, as always, from Glitch Bottle patrons, and definitely want to talk about your future projects. And we have a brief after show for patrons. But before we get there, David, can you just share with us what are some of the key takeaways that you want listeners to have from not only your book, but also this podcast?
For me, what I hope people will take away from this book is don't let the fact you've never done conjuration before stop you from doing conjuration. You don't need anyone's permission to do a conjuration. It's not as hard as people often make it out to be. It's about following the steps. If you follow the sequence and do all the steps, you can create enough magical momentum, have success. And that is what I've strived to put together. This book is something that gives you everything that you need to know and explains why the things are done, what the sources for the material are, and all the things that I've added in, which I have found have been repeatedly successful over the years for myself and for other people who I've passed things on to. And once you've done a successful conjuration, you never see the world in the same way again. It's like everything changes. Once you've had a successful spirit contact and you know certainty, not faith, that there is a whole world or worlds of spirits who are individual beings separate from you, that are not aspects of your psyche, that have their own unique independent existences, the universe is forever changed.
When it comes to the conjuration itself, listeners just heard you recite a part of the conjuration. In your years, in your decades of conjuring, have you found that spirits respond to a specific tone of voice or a firm and steady voice, or does it depend on the spirit? Does it depend on the grimoire, or what do spirits respond to when it comes to the voice of the operator?
I've always found the firm and steady voice works very well, and the people I've worked with generally go with that same tone of voice. So from my experience and what I've seen from other people when I've been the Scryer, that sort of firm, steady, even with intonational vibration of the appropriate, like divine names and spirit names, which are usually marked in the text in red or bold in the grimoires, to be what works well. I mean, there are places where I use other tones of voice. For example, during the bathing with the penitential psalms, I do like to do them in a sort of churchy Gregorian style, almost singing of the Latin. But that's just me. I just love the sound of the cadence of sung Latin. But when it's the actual conjuration, that's what I've always worked with, and other people I know have worked with, and seems to work really well.
You mentioned that you do not need anyone's permission to do conjuration, and it just takes the work and the dedication and the focus. What are some of the biggest stumbling blocks for people? Meaning, do they say, I've tried this conjuration from the Lemegetans Goetia and it just didn't work, so I might as well not try it again? Is it a persistence issue, or is it a apprehension issue? What are some of the things that you think might be some of the biggest stumbling blocks there?
One stumbling block I've come across a few times is people going, I don't have the space where I live, or I live in a shared flat or what have you, to do a conjuration. And for me, then, conjurations, I think, only really moved indoors in a big way with central heating. It's like, it's convenient now. All of the grimoire stuff, it's outdoors. So, particularly if you live in cities, I appreciate that it might not be very easy, and if you're in a shared place, to have the space to have a 9-foot circle, whatever it might be, for doing a conjuration in the house. It's very difficult. That's why I do the whole thing of making the circle for outdoor work, and talk about finding a suitable outdoor location where you're unlikely to be disturbed and going and working outdoors. Many years ago, this isn't specifically for conjuration, but the principle holds true. One group I was in, people in that group did a lot of outdoor work, and people had personal work they did outdoors, out in the woods. And oftentimes another member of the group would go and just be a physical guardian in the woods near where the person was doing their magic, to make sure that nobody disturbed them doing their magic. And that is another something that you can factor in as a consideration if you have a friend who would be amenable to travelling out to the wild with you, well, hopefully at least the two of you, because if you're doing conjuration, I'm a great believer in having a 2 or 3 person group, because, conjurer, who can also be the scribe, and your seer, as a bare minimum. Trying to do it all yourself makes it much harder to have success, in my opinion. So I don't have a space to do it. I've seen a lot of people have a stumbling block. So then it's about finding the courage to locate a suitable place outdoors, and then develop a relationship with spirits that place and go and work there. That's one stumbling block I've seen. Another is people wanting to jump in, and it's usually the Goetia and the Lemegeton, or these days a lot the Gomorian Verum. People want to jump in and start working with demons because they think they're cool and dark and edgy or whatever. At the end of the day, the intelligences, you'd be surprised what you can achieve in the intelligences. You might not need to be working with demons, for example. The intelligences can achieve an awful lot. You can get familiar spirits from the intelligences, something else I talk about in the book. So not going straight for big stuff when the friendlier and more accessible spirits are also there. That's why I always say start with the intelligence. because you're more likely to have success, and and it's very unlikely that they're going to mess around with you. So those are the two, I think, that I've had the most in people. Or people just say, well, I want to do it, but I can't afford to buy the stuff for it, or I don't have the time. And then, well, then it's a case of, if it means that much to you, you make the time, and you don't go drinking at the pub, or you cut back on your Starbucks and all the other things, and you save the money so that you can afford to buy the stuff. Saying, I can't do this because of this reason or that reason, is just making excuses. If you want to do it, you will find a way to do it. Don't make excuses and claim that you can't because of this or that. The only person stopping you in that circumstance is yourself. I've seen people say, "Oh, I want to buy this stuff, but I can't afford it," and then at a conference, and then go and spend £30 or £40 in the pub that night. It's like, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't buy it. You've just proved that you're not actually that serious about doing it. You're talking the talk, but you're not walking the walk.
I remember Dr. Skinner years ago on the podcast mentioned that when it comes to this issue of people valuing aesthetics and appearances over sincere practice, he talked about how, some people, especially on online forums, they might take a picture of themselves, wearing a seal of one of the 72 as jewelry, and in a very casual way. Can you just talk about the importance of, when it comes to things, visual representations, actual, seals and sigils, that these need to be treated with the utmost respect? And it's not about cultivating an online aesthetic. It's about the sincerity and the practicality of the ritual.
Yeah, as mentioned earlier, we have the sigils and seals of things. They're like a contact medium. They're like potentially a gateway or interface to that spirit. And if you're just wearing it as jewelry as a fashion statement, you are possibly wearing a way for that spirit to exert its influence onto you without you even realizing it. Because one thing that still needs to be emphasized more in magic, you see it hugely in the ATRs, and this is one of the most important, for me, takeaways that people in the Western mystery tradition need to get from the ATRs, is how heavy they are into their spiritual hygiene. And that is something that people in a lot of the Western mystery tradition do not pay nearly enough attention to. And this thing of like the aesthetic and wearing the seal of this because it's cool or what have you, and when you don't have any sort of relationship with that spirit, is an example of how you can be becoming spiritually unhygienic and attracting unwanted attentions. And it's really not a very smart move.
Let me follow up on that, David. It's such a wonderful point. And this is a devil's advocate question, because someone might be listening and saying, oh, well, spiritual hygiene, of course I do that. I make sure to fast and pray 3 days before a ritual. And can you share that even if someone is following a 9-day purification and meditating and praying and fasting, what is spiritual hygiene? It sounds like spiritual hygiene is so much more than just what you do inside a consecrated circle for a specific amount of time.
Spiritual hygiene is how you live your life, whether you're doing conjurations and big rituals or not, or daily practice or whatever it may be. You should be doing regular cleansing of yourself, purificatory baths. If you don't have a bath, purificatory showers. You can attach like a muslin with herbs or things over your shower head and make the right herb mix and have, so that, for example, so that you get stuff coming through from the shower with blessed herbs onto your body. It's being aware of your environment. A good example is, let's take cemeteries. Okay, cemeteries are an important thing for me because of, I do quite a lot of work with the dead. I never enter a cemetery without making offerings beforehand and getting permission to go in. There's so many people who think it's dark and edgy to go and do stuff in cemeteries. And one of the things that hangs around a lot in cemeteries are what I call astral larvae or astral garbage. obsessive spirits that will just latch on to people. And if they've gone in there and they're not well protected, and if they're disrespectful, those sort of spirits are going to love them. They're going to jump on them, and then suddenly they wonder why things start going wrong in their lives. Why they start developing bad habits, or the bad habits they've got become accentuated and far worse. They're drinking a lot more, or they start getting really heavily into gaming or pornography, or it's all sorts. Spiritual hiding is something that is part of your daily life. It's not something that you just think about when you're going to do a conjuration. You should be bathing or showering very regularly. So that's one good way to keep your spiritual hygiene up, is to always make that into a process of cleansing yourself. But also regular meditation, of keeping that stillness of the mind. Energetic work, making sure that stuff hasn't attached itself to you. It's an ongoing process, and you do need to keep on top of it. You can't just let it go for a few weeks, even, in my opinion. Your spiritual hygiene is something that needs to be something that you think about on a daily basis.
David, we also have, in addition to the wonderful wisdom you've been sharing today, of course, we have some listener questions for you about evocation and conjuration in general. And the first listener question we have for you is from Mark Williamson. And Mark is saying and asking, "Dear Mr. Rankine, I'm curious if it is possible to physically evoke planetary intelligences, Olympic spirits, and fairies. If so, have you ever done so?"
I would say yes, it is possible to evoke them. I personally have not physically evoked planetary intelligence or Olympic spirit. I've seen them in the crystal. I didn't evoke fairies, but I have seen them physically more than once. One time I made the mistake of doing the pentagram ritual in a fairy's location and got severely trounced for it. That's a story I've told in other places, and also remembering that was part of the reason for the license to remain. I have seen other spirits physically around people, like I've seen somebody's Pompajira, for example, more than once. I have done evocations where there has been physical manifestation. For me, when that's happened, it has tended to be with demons. There has also been elemental spirits that I've called up that have had physical manifestations as well.
We also, David, have a listener question for you from William McCall. And William is asking and saying, "Does a planet being visible and others that are invisible have any light and dark correspondences, good and evil, etc.? Thank you."
I wouldn't say good and evil. I would say positive and negative. And this is something that's an important thing to check when you're working with planetary things, is looking at the aspects. Obviously, a planet being visible in the sky when you're doing conjuration is a nice thing to have there. And I think it also does contribute a bit of magical momentum. If, you've got Venus bright in the sky when you're doing conjuration of Haggai, for example. But they don't have to be visible to have their influence felt. So I don't think it's about the light and dark correspondences as much as checking where planets are in relation to each other, because, again, it's something I talk about in the preparation. Some planets have more positive relationships or negative relationships with each other. And if you're doing a conjuration of an intelligence or a planet which has particularly bad aspects to planets that it's hostile to at that time, that is going to put a stumbling block on your magical momentum. So the planetary positions are important to check, but more for checking the relationships between them and how that might impact the conjuration and the magical momentum, rather than about it being about light and dark and good and evil.
The last listener question that we have for you, David, is from Jabril. And Jabril is asking and saying, "Hi, David. I'm so excited you're back on Glitch Bottle, my perfect combination." Jabril, I am equally as excited that David is back. That is awesome. Jabril, David is asking, saying, "My question is, sometimes I hear in online forums that before one evokes any sublunar entities, one must invoke angelic or celestial entities first. For example, drawing spirits into crystals or the Enochian systems of John Dee. And so Jabril is asking, David, is working with angelic entities needed for the working of the Lemegetans Goetia in your decades of experience? Anything you can share on this would help me move past my second guessing myself. Thank you, sir.
Okay, well, Goetia is something that I don't really work Goetia anymore, but I did work with it a lot in the past. And, for 20 years, the Goetic conjurations I did classical Goetia, no angelics or anything beforehand, never needed to do the whole curse process. I'm glad to say I've never ever needed to do that coercion of the spirit. And I think the fact that I've never done it might have contributed to my success, because I've always had that respect there. After 20 years or so of Goetia, encountered Rudd's Goetia, where he put the Shem Amphoros angels as sporting angels for the Goetic spirits. And I know a lot of people have moaned about this and said, oh, they don't fit, and that was just Rudd doing this and sticking stuff together. And I find it hilarious that people who are wanting to try new stuff out now somehow think it's wrong that someone back in the 17th century was also trying to be inventive and put things together and see how it worked. I tried and done a couple of conjurations with the Shem angels as well as the Goetic spirits, and the way that Rudd does it also works equally well. And for people who haven't done it before, there's like a layer of protection and insulation from doing it a la Rudd, where you have the seal of the Shem angel on the reverse of the seal, so it's facing your heart and protecting your heart, and the Goetic spirit seal is facing forward. So it's not necessary, but if you've not done it before, you might find it beneficial to work with, because it certainly doesn't interfere or make it not work. I found it was just as effective with the Shem angels as without. I'd already been doing it, as I say, for 20 years, so I already had some familiarity with a few of the Goetic spirits, because I've only worked with a few of them because I don't see the point in working with spirits that I don't need to work with. They're not Pokemon cards that I need to collect. I only work with spirit because there's a benefit of me working with that spirit to achieve what the goal might be. So, in short, you don't need to, but you might find it useful.
David, let me just ask you, because this is something I hear so much, is, oh, well, there's all kinds of magical practices, and well, Solomonic magic, you have those purists and those traditionalists. And one of the things I always am finding myself saying as a response to someone who maybe accuses a Solomonic practitioner of being petrified or closed-minded, or, oh, you just do exactly what's in the grimoire and that's it. And I just say, look at David Rankine, look at Dr. Stephen Skinner, look at Frater Ashton Chassan, or Aaron Leach. Like, there are so many examples of people who have the malleability and the innovation, and how that is a hallmark of the Solomonic tradition. Would that be an okay way to phrase it? Or how would you respond to somebody if they say that, oh, it's just traditionalists, but innovation is such a key part of it?
Absolutely. I would say take 2 points, any 2 points 100 years apart, between 1200 and now, and take a grimoire from each end of those 100 years and tell me that they haven't changed, evolved. It's been a continuous process of evolution and synergy and change, such that there is a whole spectrum from your incredibly angelic and structured stuff of the Sworn Book to the much simpler but still very specific stuff of the Gomorian Verum. Those are like poles apart, but they're still both part of the same tradition. There is a whole spectrum which has synergized, cross-fertilized, evolved over many centuries. So it's been a constant process of innovation and change. So it's ridiculous to say that it's stuck in the place, because there's centuries of change that contradicts that statement.
Thank you for sharing that, David. That's also what I tell people is every single Solomonic practitioner, sincere, genuine, in-depth practitioner with years of experience, shows fidelity to the tradition, but also has this beautiful blossoming, this flowering of innovation and malleability and synthesizing, which is exactly what you do and share in your latest tome, David. And I definitely want to ask you, of course, about your upcoming projects and a very exciting, by the way, upcoming online course, which we'll talk about. As we wrap up the main part of the podcast, let's go big picture, because your conjurations with the Planetary Intelligences have yielded results with big implications. And one of these was when you were acting the role of the seer during a conjuration of the intelligence of the sun, Nachiel. Can you share, David, what happened during this conjuration of the intelligence of the sun when he turned up halfway through the ritual? And what fascinating information did this spirit share?
That was a really surprising one for me, because as you say, I was in the Scryer role for that, and the conjurer was a woman who I've worked with a number of times, and we were there in all the preparation had been done. We were there. She started performing the conjuration, and by the time she got halfway through the conjuration, Nachiel had already appeared in the crystal to me, and I was like, well, because those conjurations aren't that long. So the fact he appeared so fast, I've never seen a spirit appear before at least one round of a complete recitation of the conjuration. So that I was a bit like, whoa. And he appeared, and he immediately greeted the conjurer. And I paused because I knew that she would want, being very, very good conjurer, she would want to recite the whole thing. She would not appreciate me interrupting her. Even if there was a message from the spirit, she would want to do the whole thing. It's still a respectful thing that you do the whole thing. You don't do half conjuration. So as soon as she finished the conjuration, I said, Nachiel's here and he's greeted you. And she was like, why has he greeted me? And it turned out Nachiel said that he knew her. And she said, oh, but I've never conjured Nachiel before. Nachiel said, you haven't conjured him for 300 years, but you conjured him 300 years ago in Greece. And this was like, okay. So for him, the reason he turned up so fast was because he remembered her, or he remembered her soul in a different body, in a different form, but her essence he recognized from the previous contact, which was kind of blowing me away. Something, hang on, this intelligence is basically saying reincarnation is a reality, and I know this person from a few centuries ago because I had a relationship with them then, and that's why I'm here so fast, because I'm pleased that this person has contacted me again after all this time. He also answered all the questions afterwards and gave her really good advice, which sorted out all of the issues that she wanted sorted out. So yeah, it was just like spirits can recognize people who've worked in the past, despite the passing of time. So they recognize the essence, the soul, whatever you want to call it, of a person, irrespective of whether that person remembers them or not, or what, they're in a different body, etc. So I was like flabbergasted that Nachiel had just like laid this on us, like, wow, they, not only is he saying, yeah, you humans reincarnate, but if you reincarnate and you interacted with us in the past, we know it's you, and we're happy to see you again. So that was like, well, flipping out. That was just quite mind blowing.
That's absolutely incredible, David. And I'm thinking, this just popped into my head, of the quote attributed to Dr. Rudd. And of course, I'm going to mess it up. But, he who is a magician is brought forth a magician from his mother's womb. And one who is not a magician can make up for this fact by education. And it sounds like from this experience of the planetary intelligence of the sun, that you were hearing directly from the spirits, confirming that if there is someone who maybe has a talent for evocation, a charism, if you will, an ability to call spirits, that perhaps this might be because of previous workings in previous lives that they might have engaged with. Would that be a somewhat fair way of phrasing it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like that people have, I'm going to use the word grace here because I think it's a nice one to use. There's like, people have a grace with the spirits, and that is something perhaps that they, like say, carry through, their essence carries through in their lives, whether they remember it or not. In this instance, this person had done conjuration before, and not had anything like this, but it happened to be that she conjured a spirit who she had conjured 300 years ago. I mean, how likely is that to happen? It's never happened in any other time in all the years, in my decades of conjurations with other people. That's the first time that a spirit just turned around and gone, yeah, I remember you. It's been a long time, 300 years.
My goodness. Do you remember the look on her face when you mentioned that? Was it just like bewilderment or, oh my goodness, really? This is from 300 years ago?
Well, it was funny because I didn't know that she had like some recollection of being in Greece 300 years ago. So him saying that kind of threw her as well, because like sometimes people have fragments of like past life things, and one of her fragments was of being in Greece a few centuries ago. So him saying this made her go, whoa. Yeah, it was like this look of, holy cow.
In addition to your excellent tome, your wonderful book that people should definitely get a copy of right away or pre-order right away, you also have a planned upcoming online course, a 6-week online course that is set to start this October of 2024. Can you share a little bit about this course and what will be covered, and how can people sign up and stay tuned for more information?
Okay, so the new book will kind of be like a must-have for it, because all the material in there will be worked through. So my plan is to work through the whole conjuration process, but I won't just be doing what's in the book. So I will be going beyond to looking at conjuration of other spiritual beings. So looking at conjurations of the Olympics, of demons, of angels. So it's going to be kind of the template of conjuration, which is what the book is, but then expanding on it and looking at working with other forms of spiritual creatures. It's going to be being done through Hadean, so it will go up on the Hadean website. If I remember correctly, I think it's going to be 6 consecutive Sundays. I think October the 27th is the first one, so it'll run from like 27th October to the 3rd of December. So people will be able to sign up on the Hadean site. I think it will go up after the pre-orders have gone on. So probably, I think, at the end of August or beginning of September, you can be sure that I will be sharing details of that for people, for anyone who's interested. It's going to be a limited number of places. I think it's going to be 30 spaces on the course. Hopefully it will go super well and people will get an awful lot from it, and then I will probably run it as an annual thing.
This sounds like a wonderful opportunity. Listeners, you have a chance to work firsthand and hear firsthand from a practicing magician scholar such as David Rankine in depth on these wonderful practical techniques and uses to accentuate, enhance, develop conjuration. That sounds lovely. And as soon as I get some info for that too, I will absolutely share that, and check the video description below if you're listening to this a little bit later on, so that you can sign up if that is and when that is available. Can you share with us, what are you working on, and do you have any hints or teasings for some of the listeners?
Yeah, I've started work now on volume 3 of the Grimoire Encyclopedia. On my current estimate, I reckon it's going to take me a year or so to do. I mean, that may go up or down depending on things I find along the way, or inspirations or insights that hit me. It'll really add to what's already there in volume 1 and 2, but because I'm still in the early stages, I don't really want to discuss in any detail what's there yet. It doesn't feel appropriate to really go into it when there's not enough of the project there for me to feel happy about talking about it. But I will say there's more illustrations in this one.
Well, we will definitely keep our ear to the ground and stay tuned for any updates only as they become available. But that certainly sounds very exciting. David, I know we have a very brief after show for podcast supporters, but as we wrap up this main part of the podcast, is there anything else that you would like to leave listeners with, either about your tome, about Conjuration, about key takeaways, anything at all?
I think really, just as I said before, the only thing that stops you from doing Conjuration is yourself. You can find a way. I think this book is an ideal starting place if you haven't done Conjuration before, because you'll find everything you need in there. I also hope that people who have done Conjuration will find it valuable, because we can always learn from other people's perspectives. I did send this out to a number of people beforehand to get suggestions, see if there's anything I've missed. I got some very useful feedback from people in the, finishing off of the book. It's my work, but I also got, useful input from other people, because trying to cover everything is easy to miss. So it was really helpful to get feedback from people like Stephen to cover stuff. Like he mentioned a few little things that I hadn't thought, those really need to go in. So that was great. And I really appreciated the feedback from Stephen, and talking with other people. I mean, like with yourself, Alexander, the realization I had about the triangle when we were talking that's in there, for example, there's a lot of synergies that went into writing the book.
David, the honor is absolutely mine, and I continue to learn from you. And I know that thousands and thousands of listeners and readers will continue to do the same because of your generosity of spirit and the ability for you to share your hard-earned, well-culled lessons over decades of experience. The book from Hadean Press, entitled Clavis Intelligentiarum, a complete practical manual of conjuration of the planetary intelligences. Author, esoteric researcher, scholar, and practicing magician, David Rankine. David, thank you so much for taking some time and sharing your wisdom on the podcast today. Really appreciate it.
It's been a delight as always. Thank you, Alexander.
Glitch Bottle patrons and listeners, I truly hope you are taking that to heart as much as I am. David is sharing his decades of experience in ritual magic, in the Solomonic tradition, with conjuring for you. He's sharing this with step-by-step guides in his latest tome. And I truly hope that you can check out the links below so that you can pre-order or order your copy, as well as check out details and stay tuned for the upcoming class with David as well. I mean, this is amazing. I was blown away because it is that beautiful balance that David Rankine and Dr. Stephen Skinner and Frater Ashen Chassan and so many other excellent practitioners of grimoire Solomonic traditionalism have, which is it's that balance between showing fidelity to a system hundreds of years old, but also having modern day innovations as well. So a huge thanks to David Rankine, and a huge thanks to every Glitch Bottle patron on patreon.com/glitchbottle. If you are brave enough to make the journey and put up with a huge amount of in-depth exploration and nerdiness, you can always support the podcast with exclusive perks over on patreon.com/glitchbottle, and I hope to see you there. As always, this is Alexander Eth reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.